A Brush With is sponsored by Bloomberg Connects, the arts and culture app. Created by Bloomberg philanthropies, Bloomberg Connects lets you access museums, galleries and cultural spaces around the world on demand. Download the app to access digital guides and explore a variety of content. Hello, I'm Ben Luke and welcome to A Brush With, the podcast from the Art Newspaper in which I talk to artists about their influences, from writers to musicians, filmmakers and of course other artists, and the cultural experiences that have shaped their lives and work. And in this episode, it's a brush with Otobong Nkanga, who explores the land and the environment in relation to our bodies and the cultures and histories that mould and define them. Working across sculpture, installation, performance, photography and video, Otobong brings together what she calls constellations of images, movements and objects to poetically interweave ideas relating to cultural history and anthropology, geography and geology, fusing in-depth research with her own lived experience. The result is a practice with a distinctive coherence between materials and concepts, where references to present-day geopolitical and ecological realities sit alongside forms, metaphors and symbols that speak to broader timescales and narratives and disparate belief systems. Otobong was born in 1974 in Kano in Nigeria and lives today in Antwerp in Belgium. She studied at the Obafemi Awolowo University in Ife in Nigeria, the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and Das Arts, the Academy of Theatre and Dance in Amsterdam. That fusion in her studies between the visual arts and performance was evident in some of her earliest pieces, including Fattening Room from 1999, in which she fused references to vernacular architecture and societal ritual in Nigeria with a nod to Western art, and particularly Diego Velázquez. Though based on performance and sculpture, that work survives in the form of photographs, and indeed for the early part of her career, this was the medium in which Otobong was most prolific. In this period, she began exploring the human impact on landscape in multiple photographic series, including Emptied Remains, which began in Germany in 2004 but continued more widely until 2015, and Stripped Bare, which captured constructions in various states of completion and repair in the west of Nigeria, from shacks to a swimming pool, put up by individuals or small groups rather than authorities, and reflecting, as Otobong put it, the dreams of individuals, their expectations and deceptions. They were the first manifestation of a concern with geographical scars and traces that have permeated her work ever since, and are linked to an interest in extractivism. As we'll hear, Otobong has travelled to see landscapes in Africa where she's found contrasting forms of mining, a marked difference between that practiced by local communities and by colonial entities. Otobong employs the form of scars and voids in disparate ways. In Solid Manoeuvres from 2015, for instance, she explores the connection between the land and European uses for the mined materials. Stratified layers of metal sheets suggest hills and quarries and are suspended on rods. Sprinkled over and around them are various materials, including makeup that contains mica, a glittering mined substance, as well as salts and copper particles. Evocative on its own, this sculpture can also be activated by Otobong through performance, in which she reinforces the bodily connection with the landscape. Mica is also used in the installations From Where I Stand from 2015 and In Pursuit of Bling from 2014, both assembled from similarly diverse materials. From Where I Stand features a carpet made in the shape of a mineral with graphic patterns across its surface, alluding to electron microscope images of mica sheets. In Pursuit of Bling was the most ambitious example of the installations Otobong began making in the 2000s that featured tables containing photographs, objects and mineral samples. She was interested in how European empires sought to put a shine on their colonial activities, extracting metals and burnishing their architecture, lending them a glister. But as well as reflecting on extractivist histories and the colonial destruction of landscapes, there was a deeply personal context too, one common to many of Otobong's projects. She remembers playing with mica as a child and being transfixed by its shine. Other materials that are redolent of her childhood are black soap, which she made and used in a hugely ambitious project for Documenta in Germany called Carved to Flow in 2017, and indigo, which she's used in various textiles and recalls dyeing clothes with her mother. This amplifies her particular sense of fusing the intimate and expansive across her practice, both in her themes and her use of materials. Textiles are a crucial means of achieving that balance, and they've grown increasingly important to Otobong in the past decade. Double Plot from 2018 is typical of her ambitious approach to tapestry. It continues the theme of a scarred landscape with a clearly figurative form, linking it to a dominant human presence and a tree with colourful roots, but also features a celestial vision, a Milky Way underpinning the image. On the surface of the work, meanwhile, are discs positioned like planets with photographic images of explosions and unrest, including one of the uprising in Tahrir Square in Egypt in 2011. It reflects Otobong's thoughts on the complexity of time in relation to her other subjects. She's recently embarked on a series of wall carpets in which she conjures images that again relate to geology and geography, evoking the shape of particular minerals while also alluding to a satellite perspective on the landscape. On these carpets, she often positions objects she's crafted from ceramic, glass or found pieces of wood, linked by woven ropes. These cords, like the lines on her beautiful drawings and her tapestries, emphasise her idea of constellations and interconnectedness, how nothing is entirely isolated. One of the most striking aspects of Otobong's practice is the fluent way that she can navigate an ever-growing disparity of materials, finding meaningful ways to unite them as a means of reflecting on our past, present and future. When we meet for our conversation in May 2024, she has just completed a new body of work for an exhibition at the Listen Gallery in London called We Come From Fire and Return to Fire. Among the pieces in the exhibition are totemic raku-fired ceramics that evoke burned tree trunks, as well as forms made from glass, fashioned, of course, from minerals transformed through fire and heat. Each piece is embellished by oils, spices and herbs, providing that perennial link in Otobong's work between the landscape and the body. So I began our conversation by asking about fire. Why was it important to take it as a subject, and why explore it in so many different dimensions?
Yeah, there were many ways of thinking about that notion of fire, and I've been thinking quite a lot, and especially looking at landscapes that have been burning, also thinking of the temperatures getting higher and worried about the summer, but also hearing stories from people that are friends that are living in Bangladesh or in Belo Horizonte or in Brazil. This last summer was very hot. And then also just listening to my sister living in Abuja, and she's like, gosh, the temperatures have never been this hot. So the notion of heat and the sense of things burning, or slow burn, a slow heat, a gradual shift, and we've had summers where it's been quite hot. So that just lingers, and I think it's infiltrating into the work, and that lingering of temperatures, and not only temperatures of landscape, but temperatures of countries, of people. We're seeing different alignments, misalignments. And so when we think of pacts of people, pacts of countries, we've seen along the lines that those pacts are reshaping, realigning things that we took for granted for the past 50 years are not at our footsteps anymore. Countries are shifting their policies, and we're in a world where temperatures are shifting. And so for me, it was interesting to think about the work in a way that, fire, we talk about fire, but we also talk about passion. We talk about things that are shifting. And so for me, it was interesting to think not only of the psychological, emotional, but also material, thinking of on many levels on how we can think of fire, burning, slow burn, temperatures, heat, and environment, love, passion, all.
Right. The interesting thing, of course, is that, yes, this is an exhibition and a body of work that explores catastrophe, the climate emergency and so on, but it also explores regeneration. And fire is used as a material for regeneration, and you don't want to ignore that complexity, if you like, of how fire is used in society and culture and so on.
Yes, I think that's very important to understand that we are looking at things from a very human perspective of how are we going to exist with all those things that are shifting. But at the same time, the landscape constantly regenerates. You have the volcanoes spewing out magma and landscapes completely becoming regenerated, new lands of deep, pure minerals to be able to plant very fertilized lands. So it has that duality and that way of understanding that as things are burning, shifting, that other things are going to exist, other life forms can survive in such extremities or in such shifts. If we think of the deep sea, it's incredible to imagine that there are animals that are deep underneath where there's no light, where there are other life forms that can exist in multiple places, or the plant that rolls for 100 years in the desert, and then once there is rain, it comes alive again. The resurrection plant comes alive again and spews out seeds and then comes back again to a state of like a dead plant rolling around in the landscape. So there are many things that exist and are mysterious to us, but they are also giving life in a different way than we imagine.
Walking around this exhibition and previous exhibitions, I've been really struck by how coherent the meanings and materials are. So, as I said about the glass and fire and ceramic and fire and so on, you embed the meanings within the materials. And this seems to me to be a crucial concern of yours. Does it begin with material? Does it begin with concept and then you find the material match, if you like?
I think it begins with many things. Sometimes I encounter a material, I encounter a stone, and then while encountering the stone, I was reading a book, and that book kind of resonates. And then in my studio, I'm drawing, and there's some things that are intuitive and some things that are emotional. So it's a collapse of all these things, and sometimes it's consciously thought through. And then I start experimenting with materials. Like if I'm thinking about that notion of burning, how do I then place that in many ranges? Is it a sound work? Because you can express that through a sound piece. Would that be the most efficient way to like express the thought? Or could that sound piece be blended with a burnt wood? Or could that sound piece be placed in a way where the sun hits really hard? So you're thinking of it in many ways, not only just in the way of making, but the way it's going to be placed in space, and hopefully they all come together. But I don't have one way of working. There are many things that trigger, and some things have been on my mind for years, but they only come out years after.
One of the ways I most enjoy your work is in its capacity for transformation, in the sense that I have witnessed certain of your works as static objects, but then I've seen them enlivened by you performing with them. And downstairs, for instance, there is a piece which has ceramic vessels which are on a rope, which go down to a carpet. And I know that carpets can be sites for performance, for instance.
Yes.
There's a sense in which every work is potentially in flux, that there's no fixed state, and you adapt the work for the space and the environment and the culture and the society in which you display it.
Yeah, I think that's very important, because every space has its own identity, and every space offers things that other spaces don't. And I'm very attracted to that notion of light. And of course, working in different museums or institutions, or you get to realize that every institution has different heights, different places where the wind passes through, where the door is. So I'm constantly considering how can this work function in multiple places without having it being fixed in a way that when shown in another place can change the meaning of the work. So when we look at the carpet piece, we come from fire and return to fire. The rope with the clay pieces can be adjustable to the height of the room, but it just means that the bottom part can then linger on the space differently. But it doesn't change the essence of the work. It just allows it to exist in its full potential.
And the ropes in the work are a form of these kind of connecting lines which appear through your work, where you have certain nodes or you form a network or a constellation. And again, that's a recurrent form which takes many different kind of material expressions, isn't it? What do you want to say with the constellations?
Well, I think with the constellations, there are many aspects of dealing with that. If you put a line, a rope in a room, you hang it from the top and bring it down, it fills the space. It's like drawing in space. And for me, that notion of expansion and retraction gives a drawing, another way of drawing each time in the space. And working with ropes allow for that. You can add more things to a rope, you can reduce it. It has a malleability that a solid block or stone does not. And so for me, it's like each time I would show the work or the work can be shown, it offers new possibility, another way of looking at the work, another way of experiencing the work or even designing the work in the space. I'm interested in rethinking the work each time, and those ropes allow for that, but at the same time to dig deeper in the ways of rope making, change the colors, think of tonal colors, the kind of expansion of the rope, the thicknesses, the way of fitting things together, and then also connecting stories. For example, we could have the sculpture, we come from fire, the carpet with the rope, and then we can add another line of ropes to it. What stops us from extending the rope from the carpet to the end of the room? So you can actually join more ropes together and expand the narrative over time. So I'm not just thinking of it for just the exhibition time, but thinking of it that it can be something that can evolve while keeping the core of the work itself, but evolve for exhibitions.
Right. And of course, with textiles, there's an enormously rich history which connects Africa and Europe, and therefore can seem to be a kind of embodiment of so much of your personal biography, for instance, but also of the colonialism which you've accessed through different ways in the work. It seems to me that textiles therefore have this kind of, they're a leitmotif through your practice.
Well, the tapestries are very much ways of telling stories, obscuring stories, but also connecting it to different productions of tapestries. We can look at the Flemish tapestry, we can look at also the African woven tapestries, but I'm also very much interested in the Asian. When we look at, for example, the Southeast Asian tapestries, ways of working, or Japanese, the ways that they work with yarns, colors, tones, the kinds of patterns that are made. And I'm looking at all these kinds of ways of making, which is not related to a colonial history, but is related to the understanding of material and how those materials really relate to what the land can offer. So if we're thinking of indigo and we're looking at the African tapestries and looking at the African fabrics, you're seeing actually the history of the land within the tapestry. If we look at the Flemish tapestry, we can see the discovery of greens and the colors of green. You can see periods in which the chemistry and the technology becomes apparent, how cadmium red enters into the tapestries, how the greens and the colors, certain colors that were not there before, start becoming part of the fabric. And so you're understanding history through the kinds of yarns, through the kinds of fabrics. If you're using silk, if you're using cotton, we're now entering into a time of synthetic fabrics and what that does. And so you're actually looking at the histories being woven within different continents, different countries, different groups of people, and you're understanding what makes that fabric and why it's so important to have these in our days and time.
And that's true too of the colours, right?
Totally.
And so in the sense, so there's this wonderful to and fro, it seems to me, in the work between the colours that have been employed as dyes and then the colours which exist in the mineral elements that you leave as minerals. So it's an engagement between a sort of certain contemporaneity, but also that historical use, the ancient use of minerals as art materials.
Oh, totally. You know, the other day I went to Pompeii and entered into the archives, and then you're looking, it's incredible when you go into the archives, into all the storages, and you're seeing pigments that were brought into Pompeii, the pinks, the lapis lazulis brought in from Iran, in those areas, Afghanistan. You're seeing how trade completely shifted a group of people. This before 79 AD, right? Before the eruption. And so you're understanding how that completely changes a whole culture, a whole body of ways of making and lifestyle. And you could then understand why those walls had specific colors, why they could paint the walls and have the blues, have the reds, because of all these minerals that have been brought in. And today we are looking at, when we had this chemical shift, so we could make indigo and imitate these minerals. And in the 20th century was a time of creating the synthetic fibers and completely imitating a color. And that shifted the whole way of making, weaving, and producing, which has also shifted the fashion industry, shifted so many industries. So I'm interested in understanding all this kind of knowledges and technologies, but also how these things have shifted the way we understand material and also understand the shift and the trades that are going on in the world.
And of course, what comes with those shifting trades is extractivism. And,
Totally.
and you've, to use a term, mined that history. You've explored it in deep ways. And some of it seems to me, derived from a trip to Namibia where you saw these kind of scarred lands, these landscapes, and you equated them with scarred bodies and how that taps into a kind of metaphor, I guess, for the climate emergency.
Yeah, I think when you visited different mines, I visited the very old mines, the Alto Bobo, that's the mines before the Germans came in with dynamites. The mines where you had the local people, because from time, mining has always existed to be able to make the coppers, to be able to make whatever we needed to make. Mining has been part of mankind's histories. But I think it's just the technologies and the ways that we're mining that have affected livelihoods, that have affected landscapes, affected ways in which people live in those environments. So it was important for me to visit those old mines and to understand, where did we go wrong? How did we go wrong? And what was interesting was to see that the people that lived there before the beginning of the 20th century were carving into these mines, and there were more this kind of circular, carved, organically shaped mines that just went deep, and parts were left, and you just felt they just carved out holes and carved out deeply into the ground, and quite deep actually, to take out the copper they needed. And the rest, you could still see remains of azurites, of malachites, of different minerals hanging at the sides and at the pockets of the walls of this mine. And quite beautiful. You just think of it like, okay, you just take what you need.
It's respectful.
It's extremely respectful. You take what you need, you leave what you do not need, and you continue and you just let it kind of rest. And then I went to visit the Sumet mine, which was this hole, much more angular, less organic, just this kind of rectangular shaped, deep holes, going deep and just exploding. You just explode and take what you need out of it, but then the rest is debris. So I feel that, when I was seeing that, it kind of made me understand what it meant in relation to a landscape where people live in, and also visiting, seeing the gold mines, seeing the can mines, seeing all those different mines. I was just visiting mines in Namibia and just trying to understand how things shifted and where we are at now today. So the notion of speed, time, exploitation, no care for a landscape, erasure of indigenous people that take care of the space, creating new narratives saying nobody lived here, so you can actually empty out a place. So the erasure of history, the amnesia, creating a completely distorted story to be able to enter into a place and explode it, because then it gives you the right, if you think nobody exists, this place was a barren land, the narrative. And at the end of the day, you come in with dynamites and clear out everything and leave that place in total destruction, but you've taken out what you need. And who are the people that are there, since you think nobody is there? The people that are there to repair without any kind of compensation, without any kind of plan or design on how to repair this landscape that has been completely devastated. And I think the whole history of time at this point in time is that trying to think, how do we repair these places that have been devastated in one way or the other, which in the design of things and in relation to capital does not think about how to repair, remediate, restitute, all the redo. But it thinks of dismantling, decomposing, decaying. So there's a D and the re and the D and the re. And so for me, it's like trying to understand, how do we work? Because we will, as human beings, need all the things we need. But for me, it's a question of the design of the after. How do you allow for dormancy of things? How do you allow for things to repair? How do you allow that, certain things are taken out, but then you allow for that thing to grow back trees, to grow back things so that it can rest a bit, and then you can take out a bit again. But it wasn't capital. The way capital was designed was not meant to think about that. It was meant to just destroy and take.
So let's move on to the questions that we ask all our guests. Who was the first artist whose work you loved?
I don't have a name, but there was the Bakor monoliths that I saw when I was the age of 4, but I never thought of them as an artist, but there were artists that made them. And this was in the Calabar region in Nigeria. And there were the stone monoliths that were carved by people. And just driving by the roadside, going to the village, and I saw this stone monoliths that they have faces, and they're called Bakor monoliths. And you have like almost smiling faces and eyes and lips and carved into the stone. And for me, that has marked me. And that was 1978. And I was born 74, so I was 4 years old. And it still marks me till today, stone monoliths. I don't know who the artists are, but there must be many artists, and they carved this in the and left it in the landscape.
Amazing. And you have it with you in the studio, that memory, as it were. So you work with stone a lot. You work with materials and minerals all the time. So
Yeah.
is that in the background?
It's not always in the background, but sometimes it just comes up, and I think of it like, I should go and visit it when I go back to Nigeria, because we're close by and I never go. And I wonder if they're still there. But it comes up once in a while. But the other works that really touched me when I was in school at the age of 11, and I had this amazing teacher at the British School in Paris, Diana Sharps. And I remember going and looking at the books, and there was a Kaibot paintings of the men scraping the ground and the wooden floors. And I was just amazed at this kind of texture. But there were 3 art. There was a Pieter de Hooch painting of the Dutch, like inside interiors with light falling in. And that marks me. There was the Kaibot painting. And then there was the work of Caravaggio. So it feels like there's this thing of like light labor and interior landscape. And so these are the things that really touch me. And just thinking of that Caravaggio painting and the chiaroscuro, and just having those intense light on the face, or the Dutch windows with the glass pane, the way it was painted, and that ray of light falling with the dog sleeping on the ground, and just this deep Dutch feel, cold but at the same time light. And then I found myself living in Amsterdam, and I understood it.
Right, how interesting.
And I lived in Paris, so I understood it. So there are all these places that you live in, and then you understand the feel, the light, which is very particular to the Flemish or the Dutch landscapes, and you kind of understand it so well.
Amazing. Which historical artist do you turn to the most today?
There are quite a number. It's not just one. I really looked at someone like Alain Capra in his way of thinking of scores and also his engagement with different groups of people, the way of thinking of the landscape. It was a big blend of things, of working with students, creating scores that can be enacted over time and thinking of technologies that can shift the way of reading those scores. There's a certain freedom in the way in which he opened up his work to the public. And for me, that has been one of the things of guiding a way of thinking and way of working.
You made a work in direct response to his work Baggage, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I made the work Baggage as a kind of homage to his work also, in which the work moved from the Netherlands into Nigeria and then sent it back to the Netherlands, and then the event with sharing the sand with people. But it was a shift for me in the way of thinking and working. Another one is Damas Nwoko, and he's an architect, artist from Nigeria, and built amazing buildings, but also thinking of material, thinking of light, and just a singular architect that is really quite amazing in the way of working with material building, the way of incorporating art into the building. And so I just thought that's someone that I look and quite amazed at the way he works, yeah.
You had this seemingly very formative conversation with your mother about architecture, didn't you, when
Yes.
you were deciding what you wanted to do with your life?
Yes.
Tell us about that, because your instinct was that you wanted to be an architect, but your mother convinced you that being an artist was a possible alternative.
Yes, because at the age of 15, I had just finished school and secondary school, and had to think about which university we wanted to go to and what we wanted to study. And I'm quite pragmatic. I'm a Virgo, so everything has to make sense. And I was thinking, God, I love drawing. I love doing all this, trying out colors, all these things. But I also loved architecture because of its kind of mathematical calculation, rigidity, building, making something that could be meaningful. And then I was talking to my mom and I was like, well, I could go and study architecture at the Obafemi Awolowo University. And then my mom was like, but I'm like, I'd love to also do art, but art does not pay. Because, you're living in Nigeria, looking at the artists, you're looking at like, oh, this one died this way, this one, nobody even remembers. And some of those artists were all male, men. And I was like, where are the women? I didn't even see any. I'm like, okay, I don't know why a woman would do this, or would there be women doing this, or where are they? But in architecture, I felt where you could be with a firm, you don't have to come out strong as your own identity. And you could work for a firm and you earn your money and you make buildings and you do the sketches. And then my mom was like, what you have to do is to sit down very clearly and think about, what are you passionate about? And I was like, yeah, but the art I'm passionate about. The art is where I could dream and imagine and just lose myself. And then my mom said to me, you have to do what you're passionate about. You cannot be thinking about what will bring what, because it will be like a candle wick that burns very fast. So you have to do what will sustain you in a long term. And when you have consistency and continuity, and she just kind of talked through that things will come. It might not be exactly what you want, but it's persistence and it will come.
And the rest is history.
And then I just went, okay, I'm doing art. We'll take the risk. Totally.
I wanted to ask you about a very early project of yours called The Fattening Room.
Oh, yes.
Which has a direct art historical reference in it to Velázquez,
yeah.
But also it has a very direct reference to architecture and particularly Nigerian architectures. Is that right?
Yeah, The Fattening Room. So I went back to Nigeria while I was studying at the Beaux-Arts in Paris. And I would go back in the summer and just follow the courses at the university, even though I was no more, because I'd left after 1 year and I came to study in Paris. But I was very much interested in following Agbo Folarin's classes, who was teaching on African religion and African architecture. And so I'd go back and listen, follow the classes. And that's where I learned a lot about African architecture, the Yoruba, Brazilian architecture, the tropical architecture, and then going through to all the orishas, the shrines, understanding all these ways of making and how that is connected to the earth of the ground and creating these earth houses. But at the same time, I think while I was in the Beaux-Arts in Paris, I had my teacher, who was Giuseppe Pennoni, saying, "Ma, Otto, what are you doing? How do you relate to your identity?" I'm like, wow, how do I even know what my identity is? And you're still trying to figure out what it is. And so with time, thinking about things, I realized that, we are Ibibio people, and I will never, ever be in a fattening room, which is part of the culture, Ibibio culture. Before you get married, to be able to be fattened in the right places, which also shows that you are capable of having a child and that you've become an adult woman. So the woman is taken into a fattening room before she gets married. So it's the family that she's marrying into that pays for this room. And the women, older women that have the knowledge of the whole history, they fatten you with, you eat, you don't go out. And it depends on how much the family that you're marrying into has. They can keep you up to 3 months in this house. And with that, you would then be fed. Your skin will be treated nicely so you're not exposed to the sun. You would eat, all that. And then at one point in time is the coming out, where everybody sees you and you've completely transformed. Your body is much more sculpted to the form of a woman. And then it's like you're ready for this. But it's not only that. You learn all the histories of the family you're getting married into. You learn the food, everything. You learn how to become the right person for this family, right? But you also learn how to manipulate the family because you have the histories. So for me, I decided, well, I will create my own fattening room. But this fattening room will be connected to things that have influenced my culture, influenced me. And then you start looking at the first people that entered into Nigeria, let's say that part of West Africa. And you see that the Portuguese were the first. That's why you have the name like Lagos. Or when we say Shebi, you sabi, sabir in Portuguese. So you have certain words that have stayed in the language and that have also stayed in the locality of places. So in a way, when I started looking at that history and time, you enter into this royal family and the Velasquez paintings of these families and the kind of costumes that they wear. But within Ibibio culture, you also have the baleine and wearing this kind of Victorian kind of clothes, right? So in a way, that combination of architecture, the combination of the lace material, and then created my own first kind of fattening room that became a performance and also then became a photographic work, was a way of like identifying, understanding the fattening of cultures that have entered into the place and how I fit into that, and also the way of creating my own fattening room that starts the beginning of my journey as an artist.
Extraordinary. Which contemporary artist do you most admire?
I'm not going to give names, but I would say that I admire artists whose works make me think, oh, I wish I had done that. Who make me also reflect on what I'm doing, that push me in ways that I can't imagine. I admire also artists that work with mediums that I don't know how to work with. Like when we're looking at people that are creating things that are in the digital sphere, like some things that are like, just like, how did you do that? Like are shifting between this universe and another universe. Like things that don't seem like attainable, but manage to break through. Artists that are also changing the way politics, having a powerful voice within the spaces, like impactful, powerful voice that can enter into places and change the way one thinks, that are working within political, social, and making also artworks, that the range. So I'm not going to pick a name because there are many that are doing that, but I think it's just the process, because at the same time, there's some artists that did works that really pushed me and still do. And then things flipped and changed. But I more or less look at the process as a way of understanding which artists that I am interested in looking at.
On the political question, is that something you have to think really hard about in terms of how you find a way to make political points? Because it seems to me that one of the ways in which art can be so much more useful than other forms in terms of addressing politics, even compared to news stories and so on, is to add complexity, to add nuance. Do you have to think really hard about how you might address a political topic?
I never think about that. I'm not thinking about that. I'm making. And I think it's embedded in the way I think. It's embedded in the way I'm using material. So it's not just a thing that I'm like, oh, now I want to do this. No, it is. I don't even think about it. It is. They're questions that I ask. They're emotions that I feel. They're histories that have been embedded in my own histories. There are realities that sting the body, and there's no other way to be than what it is. So it's not a topic, it is. There are family, friends, people that are going through certain things. You visit spaces and you're encountering things that you can't imagine that should even exist. And how do you translate this? How do you bring that into form? And so it's not about a topic, or it's not about trying to be political. I don't care about that. I care about how do I translate these things that you're feeling, these emotions, this love, this pain, this anger, all the things, and then also the realities of the worlds we're living in and how these play out, the injustice, the justices, all kinds of things that are playing. And how do I find form to this? How do I make work that can resonate with someone else, that can touch deeply in a place that opens up an emotion and a kind of empathy to understand how a life form, a non-life form could maybe feel or what it could be? I think that's it.
A Brush With is sponsored by Bloomberg Connects, the arts and culture app. The free app offers access to more than 450 cultural organisations through a single download, with new guides being added regularly. They include museums and institutions as far and wide as the Box in Plymouth in the UK and M Plus Museum in Hong Kong. Among the other guides on the app are several museums and galleries that have collected or exhibited Otobong Nkanga's work over the years, from Tate and the Hayward Gallery in London to the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and another newcomer to the app, the Mori Art Museum in Tokyo. Download Bloomberg Connects and you'll find that the guide to the Mori Art Museum has a full audio tour of its current exhibition, dedicated to a former guest on A Brush With, Theaster Gates. The guide has commentary on the works in the show by Theaster himself, as well as its curators, Katawaka Mami and Tokuyama Takuichi. To explore digital guides to all the partnering institutions, download the app today. It's available from the App Store and Google Play, and you can keep up to date by following Bloomberg Connects on Facebook, X formerly Twitter, and Instagram.
What do you have pinned to the studio wall?
Oh, many things. I have lots of threads that I work with. So some of my tapestries, I dismantle everything, and then I put that cluster of threads that I use for that tapestry on my wall. I have some rings, circular metal rings that are hanging in my studio. I like circles. So everything that is kind of roundish, I love.
You see that in the work. There are circles through the work, aren't there?
Yeah, I have lots of circles on my wall. I have a lot of tracing paper and tracing things as a way of understanding how to draw, just like I can trace a hand and then just trace it, and then after that try and draw it. So I have all these tracing papers that are hanging on the wall, carbon papers. I have colors, lots of colors of paint, different tones of greens, different tones of orange, colors for walls. And then I have postcards of artists that I find quite interesting, some exhibition works. Then I have on my wall plans for the future, exhibition spaces for the next 3 years, just hanging on my wall that while working, I glance and I look up and I kind of have a big and then continue working. But it's a good thing to have it in front of you because you just that space is big. And then you continue working. And then it transports me to that space and I start imagining works for it. And it's just a constant thing of the next exhibitions that are coming. And then I have pictures of my family, my brother, my sister. And then what else do I have on my wall? There are many things. I have, those plants that you can burn in your room, like all tied, different types of plants, dried plants that have been tied so you can chase out spirits and you can burn them. So I buy many types that have been tied with different herbs that are meant to do different things. I never burn them, but it has a very particular smell when I'm working, and it's just hanging in front of me.
With the threads and the colours and so on, it occurs to me when I'm experiencing your work that there is no less impact that the work has, but that there is enjoyment in it, even despite the toughness of the subject matter and so on. Still, in your use of materials, for instance, downstairs, there is a gorgeous work which involves knotting threads and this kind of raw material. And it is gorgeous, it's beautiful. And you don't see, and this I find a strength in the work, it doesn't seem to me that you see any conflict between beauty and difficulty.
Oh, there is. It's been almost, I started working on those ropes and the idea of the ropes for a project that has not yet been born. And it's a project for nobody. It's just a project in my head. And I'm imagining this thing. I can't talk about it yet. But it started with like the ropes that have to go around it. And so I've been working on this since 2020. And so you'll see the evolution of all these tests. And I come back to it, I disappear for 6 months, I come back again. So it's just going on. And then in November, it finalized into this ropes. But it's been a struggle. There've been the braiding, the gimping, and then the gimping does not work because the base or the part that you're sculpting underneath is not holding the threads well. And so it's been a struggle of just trying to get the right transition from a thin rope into a thick rope into a thin one, and then the transition of colors, and then to sculpt the gimping into the twisted rope. And then I also tried braiding, which I did not use in the end because it just didn't work. But each time it's like a gasp, like, oh, something has happened. I don't know yet what. And then you go back into the studio, you throw it into a cupboard, and then you're like, I don't know, it's not working yet. And then you come back again, and then finally this happens. But what is amazing is when it happens and it's so fluid, and then people don't feel that struggle. For me, I don't feel that you should feel the struggle. You should feel the essence of what the work is doing. And if the struggle is part of the essence of the work it's meant to do, then you have to leave that struggle where it is. But if it's not there, then it should create that fluidity. So in some works, you feel the struggle. In some other works, it's just fluid. It feels like it was meant to be.
That's lovely. Which museum or gallery do you visit most frequently?
Don't really visit that much. I visit more landscapes. I don't have one particular museum that I go to, but I visit many, many places in different parts of the world because of just being in places. But the constant place I go to are gardens. Every place I go to, I try to go to a garden. I try to go, no matter where, I try to put in a garden to be able to see plants, to be able to just see the different botanical gardens, whatever gardens, and just the accumulation of plants and herbs and things, and learn the names of, yeah.
They're museums of flora, effectively.
It's more the flora. That one is very consistent. And then I also try to visit stone places, like museums, the Natsokundo Museum, things like that, or quarries, fairs of stones. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Which cultural experience changed the way that you see the world?
I would say being in Europe is one, and how I see the world because it's entangled with mine. It made me understand those impacts of economy, of power, who owns what, of silences. That has deeply impacted the way I understand my place in this world and what drives me somehow. It's not always in a positive way, but in some cases, it has also allowed for the possibility to make the work I make.
Can it literally be pushing against, because you're in Belgium, one of the European countries with the worst track record in terms of its relationship with
I don't
Africa?
know. I think they all have.
Yeah,
I can't say one is worse than the other. Each one had its own role that it played. And most people say Belgium the worst. I just say they all have. The French had their own impact, the erasure of kingdoms. The Belgium, it's all different. Yeah,
the British too.
Yeah, I mean, it's all different. Yeah, but I think in other ways, like another one that had a great impact on me was being in Brazil. And just realizing how the African culture, where it found its place, understanding the ways of dormancies, of dualities. So if we think of the candomblé or the Bahia, or, how, when you think of the Virgin Mary and behind you have a Yemonja, how the collapsing of things happens, and the way of obscuring, but also creating a facade. And it was very fascinating to me to see how that has happened in Brazil in relation to the Yoruba culture, and how this played out and allowed for resilience and survival. And for me, that has also helped me to understand, also in my work, how to work in certain ways that not everything is meant to be said, not everything is meant to be seen. Who is looking at what? Who are you showing what? Where are you showing it? How are you showing it? And then what is seen at the forefront and what is behind? And I think it's one of those places that you understand what resilience means, what obscurity means, that there are many gray zones, and understanding those gray zones. Another thing that also struck me was the landscape, the way the fauna, the flora, the kind of expansion of plants. As you're walking even through Sao Paulo, you're just seeing all these tillandsias, plants hanging. You're just looking at this greenery, but at the same time, you're also understanding how, for me, it was very clear how this landscape is shaped through cars going in, or the water bodies. This was one of the places I kind of understood, and that's where Landversation took place, the first Landversation.
Which is 2014.
Which was 2014. Another place that made me understand a lot of things was the Emirates. Being in Sharjah, and then being there in 2005, and you had all these cranes everywhere, and there was a very particular light. And just the amount of construction, the amount of people working, the notion of labor, it just kind of opened up another way of understanding how this machine works, and the speed at which things were built, and the amount of people, the labor, the kind of intense work, but also the sadness. You could feel a certain happiness, two states of being. You're earning money, maybe not enough, but at the same time, you have a job, but at the same time, there were so many men, hardly any women, all these people that left their countries to work. You met some people and you could really feel the sense of sadness, but at the same time, joy that you have a job and you have some. So it was a kind of mixed feeling being there.
Which writers or poets do you return to?
Oh, I think one of the writers I really enjoy was Uwem Akpan. I don't know. And it was a book that kind of gives multiple visions within the continent of kids, children that have been through different kinds of intense lives. So those that were kind of adopted, those that, like the Rwandan genocide, to a life of a family that lived on the streets in Kenya. So it just kind of opened up many kinds of ways of looking at from a perspective of kids and how they are from in different landscapes and different places.
Did it make you reflect on your own childhood? Because you were obviously in Nigeria first and then in Europe quite soon afterwards. So did it make you reflect on your own experience as a child?
I think it made me understand the range and the kind of life and lifestyles of people, and also creates a place of empathy and understanding that we don't all have the same lives, because we tend to reflect on our lives and think that other people's lives could be like ours, and we forget that there are many, many, many ways of being in the planet and many kinds of privileges and underprivileges. An understanding of humanity and how it is. And I like books that open up ways of seeing other lives and other possibilities and enter into a place of realness, but also could be fiction. The loss of dreams, the possibilities also. There's also another book of Helon Habila that I love, which is Oil on Water, and how a journalist with dreams imagined the world, like he could change the world, and slowly how that falters, and how that falters into alcohol, and slowly how that enters into a place of loss of belief. And it's a slow slippage into that. But I like books that make you understand that the slippage is not something that happens immediately. It's something that is a slow change until you don't even realize it's a change, that you're already there.
Right.
But you're already gone, you're done. You're in another state.
Has reading others inspired your own poetry, or is that a kind of separate practice, if you like, to your reading? Because I understand that you didn't like writing, but then you realised that poetry was actually incredible freedom in terms of writing.
Yeah, I don't like writing because of the full stop, dots, commas, all these rules that I put with writing. I know, now you have to put an exclamation mark, and then some people argue like, no, you should never use an exclamation mark because an exclamation mark does not mean really much. You know, there are all these arguments about when you should, and then the column, the semicolons, and I got really, when I was, studying writing in English, I was just like, why do we have all these things? And it does mean something, but I cannot understand why. But anyway, so I think I was always worried of doing writing as an academician because I always feel like it's wrong. Somehow I'll get it wrong. And also words. I have problems with words. Especially when you're writing things, it feels so fixed, like you're going to use this word, and then I start looking at the etymology of that word. So I'm writing a text about my work, and then I want to use this word, and it ends up me spending the whole day trying to understand what that means from the French context, the Greek, the Latin, and then I'm like, no, it's not the right word, and then it becomes a burden. But with poetry, it doesn't really matter. And that's the great thing. You can take a word and you can break it into what you want it to be. So there's some words that I've invented with my work, like fragilologist, which does not exist, but it's fragilologist. So a scientist that does the research on fragility. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. You can actually invent words, and then you can play with it, and then you can alter in the landscape. And you can put in like words that don't mean anything. I can put in my own language, soap, which means the same thing, but in many languages. And you can really blend and play with the word, drag the word, break it down. You can really sculpt the word, and it's amazing. You can go like
So you can play with phonetics and so on.
Phonetics, you can do many things with it. You can arrange it the way you want. You can put a long dash. You can draw in it. It's just like, it's a pleasure.
It's great.
It's freedom.
As you say, it does sound like a sculptural process.
Yes, it's much more. And even the way I write my poems, I would start with a word, and on top of that word, I would, like, it could be asop. Then I could be like age, sage, page, dage, gray, and then it could be also age. Then underneath, then if it's age and you can write sage, then you can write yeah. And then with that, it allows me to brainstorm on a more horizontal level. And then I can pick that word that I want at the end of the day. So it might not be page that I started with, but it might end up in age away. And then away might be a way, or it could be away, and then it could be huh. Like I start imagining, and you can create the poem also with the phonetics. You can create the poem with the emotion. You can create the poem with the language. You can create the poem with many other languages. And I find that really amazing to do.
We're going to talk about sound now. So what music or other audio do you listen to while you're working?
Okay, there's specific music I listen to, the cinematic orchestra, because it allows you to like recalibrate, and like there's no, so you're listening to that. And sometimes I listen to like Alt J. Sometimes I listen to bonobo. I think these are kind of right frequencies to work with. And then I might listen to Fatoumata Diawara. Then I listen to Alifa Kature. Then I listen to Umu Sangare. Then I would listen to Leta Mbulu. I mean, there are many.
So there's different music, so different types of work.
Different types, and I'm switching. And then sometimes it might end up with Rihanna, because it kind of works with working. And when sometimes I'm working and then I start dancing, because I have to get away from the work. So I then put on like my Rihanna playing and I dance away, and then I come back and then I can switch it on to, that's a Christian Atunwa Atunja, like jazz, like hardcore, lovely jazz. Then it ends with like Black Sands of Bonobo. Yeah. So then I might then flip into a moment again to dance and go into Afro beats. And then I can listen to, oh my God, like Fireboy, DML. And then I'm just sliding. I'm sliding. Then, my husband sometimes says he cannot concentrate because I'm singing at the same time. Then I sing. I know the words to all the songs. Like I'm just singing away while working.
It sounds like great fun.
No, it is fun. Yeah, in my studio. Yeah.
Is there a particular discipline in your daily working life that you see as an essential ritual?
Sleep. Oh my God. Like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, Lord, I'm coming back to you. That's the bed I'm talking to. I'm coming back to you. Just hold on. I just have a few things to do and I'll be back. And sometimes I come back to the bed at 3 a.m, but sometimes I enter that bed and I wiggle and I'm like, this is so good. It's so good. It's like, I don't know if that's a ritual, but it's just, yeah, because the days are intense. Every day is like extremely intense. And the bed is the one consistency in my life. Because the food is different. You're traveling, but just going to bed is just consistent.
If you could live with just one work of art, what would it be?
I would live with a stone.
Because you could sculpt it?
No, because it would contain all what I need.
That's so nice.
That's a work of art, right? It's made by wind, water, air, all kinds of things, but it's still made.
That's lovely. And lastly, what is art for?
I think the one thing that just passed my head is when art does not exist within a society, or that it's been taken out or stolen or whatever within that society, one loses the understanding of how things were made. That relationship to the ancestors, that relationship to material. So I think it has a very fundamental relationship in understanding the technologies, the histories, the transmissions, and also understanding how we lived. You know, if you're looking at a Renaissance painting, or you're looking at the works made by the medieval artists, and you actually understand so many things about the draperies, the histories, the culture of a place. So it's a reminder of what you are, who you are, where you're coming from. But it's also filled with possibilities. it's a calmer. Yeah, it's a way of also reinforcing your existence in a way.
Otobong, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Otobong Nkanga, We Come From Fire and Return to Fire is at the Listen Gallery in London until the 3rd of August. Otobong's first permanent UK commission for art on the Underground at 9 Elms Underground Station will launch in 2025. And that's it for this episode. Please subscribe to A Brush With wherever you're listening, and do give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Do also subscribe to our sister podcast, The Week in Art, a deep dive into the latest big art world stories, the top shows and the key issues every week. And please subscribe to The Art Newspaper at theartnewspaper.com. We're on X, formerly Twitter, at Tan Audio, and on Facebook, Instagram and Threads. Production, editing and sound designer on A Brush With are by David Clack, and the producer is Lewis Jebb. Thanks also to Daniela Hathaway. A big thank you to Otobong Nkanga. Thanks for listening. Bye for now. A Brush With is sponsored by Bloomberg Connects. Download Bloomberg Connects today and discover cultural institutions on demand.